good evening, everyone. Cousins many, and many others as well. It's great to see you all here. Just seeing the thing about the revolver, I noticed in the Herald 2 weeks ago, they were trying to use the revolver to sell a house because there's a house in Fremantle, and the story is that Mrs. O'Connor threw in anguish and rage, threw the revolver down the well in front of this house. And that was the lead story on trying to sell the house. So it's interesting how the myth, the story just gets bigger and wider and spreads and seeps wherever you look. And what I'm going to do tonight is to go on my little adventure with the story and just sort of work through what's happened when I first met Mr. O'Connor as a 10-year-old to how I see him now. But just before I start, it's a very appropriate mention of the Noongars, the original owners of the land, because today is a poignant intersection of Aboriginal and European history. 183 years ago today, Captain Charles Fremantle ran the Union Jack up the mouth of Swan River and took formal possession of the western coast of New Holland in the name of the Britannic Majesty George IV of England. Now, we're not sure the exact spot the flag was raised because Captain Fremantle makes no mention of it in his diary, so he goes around proclaiming land wherever he is. And the main thing in the diary on May the 2nd was the problem of getting his two boats across the bar into Fremantle Harbour. And funnily enough, that was the first challenge that C.Y. O'Connor faced when he came this bar at the mouth of the river. And 62 years later, he faced that challenge. And 6 years after he arrived in 1897, on the 4th of May, so in 2 days, with the help of Alfred Nobel's dynamite to remove the bar, large ocean-going vessels came into his harbour. Well, my journey with C.Y. O'Connor started. My mum and chucked us all in the back of the Holden station wagon and took us down to Fremantle, and we stood there and craned our necks and looked up at this man, and she said, "That's your great-grandfather. He's an engineer." And I didn't really know what engineers were. I was really keen on sport, and I looked at the roll of map under his arms. I thought, gee, I wish that was a cricket bat, you know, and I wish that he'd used that bat to slay the English attack and got 100 before lunch at the MCG. But sadly, he was only an engineer. If I'd found out the Indian wicketkeeper at that time was a Farouk engineer, that would have got some traction with me. But unfortunately, I didn't find out till much later. So that was the first visit. This guy sort of disappearing into the clouds up on the plinth. Then the next thing was at school, and we did the obligatory project. Now, I've lost mine, and thank goodness I have. This is my brother Rod. He's one of the real academics of the family, and he actually got the story right, because he said that O'Connor shot himself, and then 10 months later the water came through. When I did my project, I wrote down what the teacher said, because that's what you do. He shot himself because someone turned on the tap in Kalgoorlie and the water didn't come through. And that's a myth. And it's interesting, when I take school kids around, there's always one in the group that says, "I know what happened." And it's interesting. It's like, you know, Captain Cook discovered Australia. Those myths are set in concrete in our history, and they're so hard to move, even though, if you look at them logically, you know, they can disappear pretty easily. So projects were first. He got an A- for this, by the way. Now, in my sort of study of O'Connor, these are the two bookends of my O'Connor search. One bookend is the Victorian statue at the Fremantle Harbour. The other bookend is Tony Jones's sculpture down at the water at South Beach, now called C.Y. O'Connor Beach. And this, to me, is the one that I'm really connected with. Couldn't connect with that one. Couldn't see. All I was looking up was nostril hair. But this one, I could really connect with. And I'll come back to that a little bit later on. But first of all, there's the opening of the harbour, and you can see the man is not only head and shoulders above the crowd. He's head, shoulders, feet, knees, and everything. This was a wonderful sculpture, and it's a great story too. It was done by public subscription, a local sculptor, Pietro Porcelli, 17 entries Australia-wide, and it was commissioned for £1,500, cast in Italy and opened by Sir John Forrest. But here it is, the typical Victorian version, way up in the sky, representing heroic, and it's a well-documented story of an engineer who shaped earth and water. But those private life with friends and families are seemingly locked away up in that plinth, frozen in bronze. So to try and understand the family, I found the best thing to do was to try and channeling the two of his daughters I knew best, and a lot of my cousins knew very well as well. My grandmother Brigid, the keeper of the C.Y. O'Connor public service gene, because he's a complex man, he had these compartments, and she I think best shows the public service gene, and the Greataunt Kate O'Connor, the artist and the rebel, she's the keeper of her father's outside the square, feisty, humour sort of gene. Now, they both lived into their 90s, and I think none of us ever asked those sort of probing questions. We weren't interested, and also you got the feeling it was a taboo subject. It was not the sort of thing that you talked about. But, and in the archives, I mean, one of the stories that my Aunt Muriel Dawkins told us was that there was a bonfire at one stage and there was a lot of personal documents that were burnt. Now, we'll never know if that's true or not, but it could be, because there's so few personal accounts of O'Connor available. There are two very valuable ones, one written by Brigid and one written by Kate, and both written in their own hands, and they were written for talks to school children. Now, and they reflect that part of O'Connor that these girls, I think, represent. Brigid's account is the keeper of the public service gene. It's the man and his good works, and not really about the father that they obviously loved and admired. Kate's, on the other hand, the rebel gene. She refers to the family as harum-scarums and talks about the open house, and suddenly someone knocks on the door saying, hey, you're both sleeping in that bed because we've got someone out of work that's coming and they're going to be using your room. Some people knocking on the door, O'Connor paying them some money, and there's a great story in her letter, the article she wrote, about someone coming. O'Connor gave him 10 shillings. 2 months later he came back and gave the 10 shillings and said, thank you very much, it got me a job, and here's the money I owe you. So what also comes out, a man totally absorbed in his work. Kate mentions, this is quite interesting I think, she said he was so absorbed he hadn't almost noticed that they'd changed countries between New Zealand and Australia. And that to Kate was very poignant because she didn't like Australia, didn't like Fremantle much at all. She'd come from the green and pleasant land of New Zealand as a 14-year-old, year 9 in our language, and you know, she just didn't like the place much at all. So two of the myths that come out, one of them is in Kate's account. There's stories about he got so cross sometimes he would jump on his hat. And that was a story that came from New Zealand. Now Kate quite rightly says, look, he was an economic manager and an engineer. He had a big head. He had to order his hats from England. Why would he jump on his hat if he had to wait 6 months to get another one? And so that makes sense for someone that understands timelines and budgets. They're not going to jump on a valuable thing just because they've got a little problem with their anger. So I think that particular myth that's sort of come through about him jumping on his hat. I was talking about this at a school once, and I had the hat and I threw it on the ground, and some little kid came out and jumped on it, which was very annoying because it's one of my favourite hats, but my fault. Now, here's the family, and this is in 1891. We've got Brigid here and Kate just above her, and this is them heading off to Western Australia. There's the whole family, and we're going to concentrate on these two at the end. The Brigid on your right-hand side, Bridget and Kate. Now, One of the other myths that sort of wanders around the family is the fact that the Sunday Times never darkened the door of the house where they lived. And here we have, this is one of the articles that's considered to be one of the reasons may have contributed to his death. This was in the Sunday Times, not owned by Murdoch then, the 9th of February 1902, and this is talking scurrilously about the man and about the fact that the pipeline's taking time. Is he pocketing some of the money and so on? Which is very sad because, as Kate points out, he was, as a public servant, he was acutely aware of being compromised by risky personal association. Never any chance of a cab charge controversy, probably should be a handsome cab charge controversy with Mr O'Connor, because he would rather entertain at home rather than accepting an invitation that could be linked to a project that he was doing. But he almost set himself up. The harbour was done before time and under budget. Then along came the pipeline, and there were problems. Their ship was sunk, they lost some steel for pipe, there was problems in sealing the pipes, and people were saying, how come it's taking so long? He must be sliding some of the money away in his pocket. Well, I'm happily a keeper of one of Aunt Kate's newspaper cuttings. There it is on the left-hand side. And in there is a series of interesting newspaper cuttings, some with comments, but most interesting, the ones that she's chosen. And here we have, the one is a Sunday Times, dated the 29th of the 7th, 1924, on one of her trips back from Paris. So the myth, there are other articles about the Sunday Times that are stuck in here. This is obviously, she's aware it's the Sunday Times because she's written there in her own hand. So there's another little myth that slides into the past. Now, our grandmother, Bridget O'Connor, a beautiful girl. Look at this is the ranging, the dates at the top, going from the top left-hand side at 18 months, then at 17, 1908, that's just before her marriage. At the bottom there, that's in her wedding dress, and the next two, 1938 and then 1949, and that's the grandmother that I remember very well. And she was such a wonderfully calm and encouraging person. She would greet our childish stories with an encouraging, fancy that. After a while, it just became fancy. And then she would supply us with barley sugar and Fanta and keep encouraging us to tell us stories. I just got my licence and I drove her down to Albany in her wonderful grey high dramatic Holden T200. It was the number plate. There I was for 6 hours with her in the car and had the opportunity to talk. But you know, I'd suddenly grown up. I got my licence, so I was just concentrating on the road. But you know, I look back and those opportunities of talking, but about things, not the taboo subjects, but other things about her childhood. It was just an opportunity lost. She heard I'd won a couple of running races, so she handed me this silver medal, and it's a magnificent thing. It's one of her ancestors, L. O'Connor from Ballycastle, 1873, athletic sports it's got on the back, and that's what she was. She would do that, and the gene that follows, her father, who loved having family breakfasts and lunches, loved getting the family together, he'd encourage all the kids to come up with a joke, a smart thing, a song, and he'd flick them half a crown. So this was her carrying through her father's encouragement of young people. And I look at this, this is, was put up as a propaganda poster in 1938 in England. And I think that, to me, symbolises our grandmother. Keep calm and carrying on. And when you consider what a tragic life she had, but a lot of people did, branching across World War I and World War II. She lost her father, she lost a brother in World War I, she lost her youngest and oldest son in World War II. And there she was, this calm person, listening to all our childish little natterings and handing out barley sugar and Fanta. Now this is a magnificent poster, a portrait by Richard Waldendorp, and this is Greataunt Kate. And what a character she was. She was that side of O'Connor that I'm sure he had under control, because he realised as a public servant engineer the wicked sense of humour he had to be very careful with. That wicked sense of humour, one great example of it, when Eva was born in New Zealand, Susan, his wife, telegrammed him, he was away on the West Coast working, said, what should we call her middle names? He sent back these two unpronounceable ancient Irish names. The clergyman couldn't pronounce them, so he just put H, cross, 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 D, and the next one, and he left it to the family to work out. Susan, I don't think, had the same sense of humour, because she gave her those names, and poor old Eva had to live with them until she could shorten one of them to Honorina, which sort of made a little bit more sense. Now, Aunt Kate, I best knew towards the end of her life. She, in 1906, took off and went to Paris. And she just wanted to get into that bohemian lifestyle. And when Joy and I went to see Midnight in Paris, that lovely Woody Allen film, we looked around in the corners. We could see Aunt Kate. There she is, just ghosting around. And the stories of her there are just so fantastic. Once again, as a young person, I just didn't ask her those things. I was just so annoyed about that. But towards the end of her life, every Tuesday, my mother would pick her up and bring her back to our place and feed her tripe and champagne. And as a 21-year-old, I just thought this was bizarre. I would sit with her, and my mother would whisper, "It's what they eat in Paris." And every so often, when the champagne got down a bit, tripe she wasn't that keen about, but champagne went down a bit, those lovely bangles down there, she'd rattle them, "Betty! Betty!" And my mother would come running up the hall with the bottle to top it up. Now, she had an absolutely wicked sense of humour too. Towards the end of her life, Brigid she was the keeper. She was looking after her, and she was worried about her. So she got the Anglican Archbishop to come and visit her. Well, Kate, not to be promptly arranged for the Catholic equivalent to come and visit Brigid. And she was just an absolute character. And between the two of them, I could slide between the C.Y. O'Connor that doesn't come out in his public works. Now, she didn't sell. We reckon she might have sold one or two paintings in Paris. We're not sure. But now she would be so proud, and we're so proud of her. She's recognised as one of the great women artists of the 20th century. And I'll go very quickly over this picture because it was a mobile phone picture in the National Gallery. I'm going to be arrested after this. I didn't have the flash on, but there it is. That's Kate on the right. That's Grace Cossington-Smith and Margaret Preston, and she'd be so thrilled to be hanging in the National Gallery with them. And I promise I'll destroy this picture as soon as we've finished. But the other thing that's, I think, really exciting is recently one of her paintings was sold for nearly $200,000, and she would just be beside herself. And her Brigid would sigh a very appreciative fancy. And I think her father would flick a couple of silver coins for that. Now, I just want to quickly go through to finish off with just the way that we've changed about the way we deal with our heroes. Kate and Brigid were justifiably proud. They were happy to her father to be up in the clouds. But I think now, in this world of Twitter, Facebook and social media, we want our heroes down with us. And I'll just quickly run through some of the statues in Fremantle and just look at... Here we have John Curtin. Now, great Prime Minister, wartime Prime Minister, a man of the people. There was criticism when that statue went up. He should be down on ground level because he was a man of the people. This is Huey Edwards. Now, I went down and measured him the other day. He's 7'3". But that's what you did back then. The heroes were elongated. He's a big bloke. I was thinking of standing Aaron Sandlin's beside him, but he wasn't down. This is just near the Oval. But this is Huey, our most decorated soldier in World War II, VC winner, 2 DFCs and bars, and also the Governor of West Australia. So that's the more Victorian way. Old Bon Scott. Freo Boy, Posty, Decky, he's down at Fremantle Harbour where he should be. Now he was, vertically challenged. He's only at 5'1", and Greg James, the sculptor, was absolutely accurate. He made him exactly life-size, but he needed to be amped up a bit. So they whacked him up on an amplifier to fit the legend. Here we have John Jerovich, great South Fremantle full forward, once again on a pedestal, but it's a human pedestal. The poor old East Fremantle player, he's going to collapse pretty soon, so our hero is going to come down to earth and be down at street level with us. Pietro Porcelli, now here is the sculptor of O'Connor, the artisan, feet on the ground, steady, a worker. The only way that you could see O'Connor's statue is to go and buy your own cherry picker. And this is my old colleague at the museum, Ian McLeod, who's a world expert on bronze sculptures. He's up there checking out O'Connor. The port's asked him, check him out please, see how he's going. 1911, it's over 100 years, and Ian gave him the thumbs up. He was giving it the metallic equivalent of a skin cancer examination there. He said the only thing you need to give him is a light water blast, and I don't think there'd be any issue in piping water up to this chap. Now, back to my favourite sculpture. This is the one at South Beach. And it changes every moment of the day. The sea breeze, this horse is charging through the water. With a northwesterly, it's racing away with the waves coming behind it. On a lovely evening like this, you can just sit out there and contemplate the world. And the great thing about it, its historical significance. This place is just brimming with history. Here he is. I've got my little pointer. That is the O'Connor statue out there. But on the beach, there's Rob Jetty. Now, he's responsible for jetties as well. Here's Wyola. That's a tugboat. There it is there. That's a tugboat in Fremantle Harbour. 1912 it came over. It was a tugboat in his harbour. It was shipwrecked, boarded up on the beach. Big nor'wester came and shoved it into a sandhill. So that's their Wyola staying there. There's a bit of Fremantle Harbour. And over here is a barge that the breaker, the shipbreaker, is the guy that ran the boxing troupe at the Royal Show. Nice, interesting bloke. Don't have a fight with him. And he was breaking up the ship and loading it up on this barge and then taking it to Cranzersteen in North Fremantle to sell the metal. The big nor'wester came and pushed it up on the beach. So this place is absolutely brimming with history, and we know from the coroner's report that O'Connor died right there because the splash mark was on Rob Jetty. There's the foundation of the jetty, just there, and so the splash mark's there. So walking down and sticking your feet in the sand and telling and talking about that story, it's a very moving experience because you're sitting surrounded by history. O'Connor, when he stood there, if he'd flicked his head around, he would have seen the harbour. He would have seen the lighthouse at Rottnest on a good day. That was his. The jetty was his. The railway is just over the first primary dune. Over the second primary dune is the Mundaring Weir. So within a sweep of the head, he'd be able to pick up railways, harbours, everything. And that must have been standing in the water there, removing his false teeth, taking out the gun. Must have just been, it's beyond sadness, it really is. 10th of March every year, we get a small family group together. On the corner of O'Connor Close and Rollinson Road, there's a big bougainvillea bush. We go and pick bougainvilleas and we spread it around and we swim them out to the statue. And we're looking at, later on, the ashes of Kate O'Connor. She wasn't keen to be buried in West Australia. So the ashes are living on a certain mantelpiece in Claremont. And we're looking at the possibility, at round about Christmas time, getting family together and coming down and letting the ashes go in a good easterly to float out towards Paris. So here's the sculpture, and Christian Sprogo, the photographer, thank you Christian, over there. Oh, sorry, that wasn't... What I love about this statue, it's a very simple design. The head is twisted, the body's in tension. If you look at the horse, the nostrils are flaring. The horse knows something's up. And the whole thing just tells of that terrible moment of the horse twisting one way and the rider twisting the other. And there we are. This is the family group this year that we've just had a nice swim, and we're just about to head off to the coffee shop just to drink his health and to remember him. And this letter, I imagine this letter being written in a dark and lonely study on Beach Street in Fremantle. Martyn will talk a little, I'm sure, more about this, but imagine a couple of days before, and there he is, writing in pencil but not rubbing it out, scribbling it out. He's just trying to make sense of what's happening to him. And at the end, he's knocked on our grandmother's door, his normal riding companion. She can't go riding, she's not well, he's by himself. He possibly adds a little bit and dates it and then heads off. Thank you very much.
Now let me preface my task talk this evening by asking you to remember that although C.Y. O'Connor died just over 110 years ago, when Victorian standards and morals were still pervaded in a British Empire at its zenith, his death and its remembrance still remain controversial. I would also like to ask that in listening to me, you try to imagine what it must have been like in those far-off days before the First World War, and while thinking about what I'm saying, to think how you might have felt had you faced the same circumstances and events. C.Y. O'Connor was, to his contemporaries, and remains so to this day, a hero. One can well imagine, therefore, the impact the news of his death on the morning of March the 10th, 1902 must have had. Without any prompting, flags on government and public buildings, clubs and elsewhere were lowered to half-mast. Within hours, the government announced that on the following day, Tuesday, March the 11th, all public offices would be closed and operations on the Fremantle Harbour Works would be suspended to allow officers and workers to attend C.Y. O'Connor's funeral, while those working on the water scheme at Mundaring were given leave to attend the funeral. Sir John Forrest, Western Australia's first Premier and now a Federal Minister in the young Commonwealth Parliament and on vacation in Perth, sent a telegram of sympathy to acting State Premier William Kingsmill, saying what must have been in everyone's mind that day. He said, "It is indeed sad that just when two great works, the Fremantle Harbour and the Coolgardie Water Scheme, which will ever remain as monuments to his memory, are about to be completed, he should have been so unexpectedly removed from the scene of his great and unceasing labours. I mourn with the people of Western Australia the loss of one who has left behind a high and honourable record of splendid public service. And I mourn the loss of a dear and valued personal friend." It really is shocking. Read on, it's awful. Indeed, Monday the 10th of March, 1902, should have been C.Y. O'Connor's day of triumph, as he was expected to witness confirmation of a successful pressure test of a section of the pipeline at Chidlows carried out on the previous Saturday under the direction of Charles Hodgson, engineer in charge of the construction of the Kalgoorlie water scheme, and not as it was the day of his death. On Tuesday, the day after the day of the funeral, over 150 workers headed a cortege estimated to be 1,000 strong, attended by more than 100 carriages. Thousands of people lined the streets on the way to the East Perth Cemetery. Wednesday, the day after the funeral, the West Australian described C.Y. O'Connor's death as nothing less than a national loss because, and I quote, "the state will never have a more conscientious or indefatigable public servant than O'Connor proved himself." Now, puzzled by what was apparently so out of character, the newspaper strongly criticised those, and I quote, "irresponsible writers and even thoughtless members of Parliament who had made hostile statements about C.Y. O'Connor, saying, quote, to refer to a proven man of the ability and character of the late engineer in chief as if he were a charlatan, if not worse, was a deplorable and entirely unpardonable act. The day after his death, his son Roderick discovered a note among C.Y. O'Connor's papers lying papers lying on his desk at home. Now that answers the question that Mike puts. Those papers that disappeared were his notes, detailed notes explaining what was what and who was what, because they'd never been revealed. This note, which you've seen, was published in full by the West Australian under the heading, "Pathetic Farewell Letter. His brain racked by worry." This is the famed so-called suicide note. However, because it was found among notes and comments defending himself against malicious attacks on his probity by members of Parliament while he was away in South Australia, the note that we have seen may not be quite the suicide note of an insane person as it's properly supposed to be. On Thursday, March the 13th, an inquest presided over by the district coroner, Dr. Black, was resumed after having seen the body, of course, on the day of the 10th of March, which was a rule in those days that the jury had to go and cite the body. Now, there were two key witnesses, Charles Henry Hoskins, an engineer and well-known friend of O'Connor, and O'Connor's solicitor and legal advisor, Mr. M.L. Moss. Both gave graphic accounts of O'Connor's agitated behaviour in responses to what had been said about him during his absence in South Australia, in Parliament and in the press. Hoskins told the court that on Friday the 7th, that's only 3 days before his death, he had found Connor in an extremely agitated state, holding a marked copy of the Sunday Times newspaper published on February the 9th, again weeks before while he was away, during both their absences in Australia, South Australia. He said the underlined words were deliberately chosen to wound as well as insult and defame C.Y. O'Connor. He said, "It is open," this is what was said, "it is open rumour that this Shire president from New Zealand has absolutely flourished on palm grease." It went on, "We cannot escape the conclusion that Mr. O'Connor is a palm-greased humbug, meaning a liar, and a crocodile imposter, and one guilty, quote, of reckless extravagance juggling with public funds. The newspaper also accused him, among other things, of bribery, salting away public money for his own benefit, and mismanagement." O'Connor was so agitated that Hoskins thought he'd gone out of his mind. C.Y. O'Connor's solicitor, Moss, told the court that O'Connor was particularly disturbed that no one in the Parliament had defended him against these and other attacks from within the Parliament. According to Moss, C.Y. O'Connor was so agitated that his hand was shaking all the time, and he was in a high state, he said, of nervous tension. Now, in admonishing the jury, and this is critical to my argument, the coroner pointed out that although in England it had been almost a mania among the juries to return a verdict of temporary insanity, a question which he believed, I do not think anyone of the average jury was competent to give any opinion of any value anyway. In other words, don't give that verdict, please. Nevertheless, the jury reached the following verdict: death by his own hand through a bullet wound from the revolver at Rob's Jetty, Fremantle, while in a state of mental derangement, earned through worry and overwork. However, had the jury taken the coroner's advice and made no reference to O'Connor's state of mind, the verdict would have read as follows: death by his own hand through a bullet wound from a revolver at Rob's Jetty, Fremantle, through worry and overwork. Now, as O'Connor had been in charge of the Department of Works since May 1891, the year before the discovery of gold at Coolgardie caused a mad rush of tens of thousands of people from the rest of Australia into a waterless wilderness hundreds of miles from Perth, you understand what responsibility he must have been taking. And we now know that without O'Connor's energy and Forrest's visionary premiership of Western Australia in the 1890s, gold rushes that occurred more than one, as you know, most likely would have resulted in a motley collection of disconnected bits and pieces of engineering and architecture and other public works. But thanks to this remarkable partnership, such did not occur. Unfortunately, this partnership between architect Forrest and builder O'Connor was broken in 1901 when Sir John, having resigned his premiership, was elected as a founding member of the new federal parliament sitting in Melbourne. Now, with Sir John's departure came political chaos. Within a year, 4 governments held office, each led by a long-forgotten, small-minded men who had neither vision nor plan. Consequently, having lost his friend and patron, there was no one in state government to whom O'Connor could turn in what was now becoming his hour of need. Worse still, in 1902, the Premier was George Leake, a man who, along with all his cabinet colleagues, had been, while in opposition, vociferous opponents of the Kalgoorlie water scheme, as proposed by Forrest. Because Forrest's wider vision saw scheme water, coupled with the new country railways, as the key to opening new agricultural settlements either side of the pipeline, which it does to this day, and not, as is still popularly believed, to be there to improve the gold mining industry itself, because the gold mining industry did not need any water. It was getting plenty cheap water and dewatering mines. At bottom, these attacks on C.Y. O'Connor's honour and integrity as an engineer, as well as a public servant acting according to the best traditions of public service, and in this regard, O'Connor was especially conscious of his duties, his honour as a gentleman, and of the trust he placed in the state government and his professional colleagues to do likewise. In May 1895, almost as soon as the London consultants had found the Kalgoorlie water scheme feasible, O'Connor, whose special skills were in railway and harbour works, appointed one Thomas C. Hodgson, a highly qualified hydraulic engineer from Victoria, as the engineer in charge of the construction of the Coolgardie water scheme. Now, from then onward, it was Hodgson who, through the engineer-in-chief and with his approval, made all the important recommendations affecting the site and the construction of the dam and of all the technical details of building the pipeline. Thus, if not the father, who clearly was John Forrest, Hodgson was at least the mother of the Coolgardie Goldfields water scheme in all its engineering aspects. LePage, in his history of the Public Works Department, said this of Hodgson: "In fairness to Hodgson, if he was entrusted with the detailed management of the scheme, he must also be credited to a large degree with its successful completion. A considerable proportion of the work was undertaken during the period of his almost absolute control of the project. If so, why was C.Y. O'Connor so moved by the controversies surrounding the pipeline as to commit suicide?" Good question. As Hodgson was relieving O'Connor from almost all the work on the pipeline, this leaves us with the question as to the causes of O'Connor's worries. These must have begun when people began to be critical of the time taken to complete the pipeline, which was first proposed in 1896, and the loan money wasn't raised until 1888. Questions began to be asked in Parliament as to why the delay came as early as September the 3rd, when during a debate on causes of the delay, initiated by Hopkins from the Goldfields, members pointed out, with miles of open trenches, tens of thousands of uncorked pipes on the side, and no pumps installed, construction must have been in a state of near chaos. These delays were partly to do, as we now know, and they were aware of, with the slowness of hand corking the pipes, joint to joint, between each of those thousands that had to be laid. On the 14th of January 1902, that was about 5 months later, Hopkins again asked about progress on the scheme and was told it was expected to be completed at the end of the year, which in fact is about right. When the debate was resumed 8 days later, the day before O'Connor left for South Australia on the 23rd, members began to inquire even more deeply into the conditions under which the pipeline was being constructed. In an attempt to speed up construction, Hopkins, as engineer in charge, had recommended that patent rights to a caulking machine invented by James Curtin be bought. This contract and the fact that Curtin was also handsomely paid for supervising the work was now an issue. On January the 29th, in Legislative Council, Frederick Thomas Crowder, a member for Goldfields, used a motion calling for the early completion and testing of the first section of the pipeline as an opportunity to launch a wholesale attack upon the management of the scheme, which enabled members to have a field day attacking O'Connor and the scheme. Even Winthrop Hackett, part owner of the West Australian newspaper, a former strong supporter of St John Forest and of his scheme for the pipeline, joined in, giving aid and comfort to those who were aiming to destroy O'Connor's credibility, saying, as they all did, under parliamentary privilege, "Mr. O'Connor, the engineering chief who is at first and last responsible for the mechanical," he means the actual management, carrying out of the scheme, as a gentleman not only of high reputation, but a gentleman as jealous and as tender of that reputation as any member of this House can be of his own reputation. And if this scheme should be a failure, there being various degrees of failure, I will say this scheme should be proved, if this scheme should prove a substantial failure from an engineering point or managerial point of view, or as regards the object of carrying water to the goldfields at reasonable cost, then Mr. O'Connor goes forth to the world as a condemned and disgraced engineer. There is no use blinking about the matter. There is no use beating about the bush. I did hope that instead of quietly saying yes to the motion, the members representing the government would have given the House what has its right to expect, some explanation and some reply in regard to the extremely serious allegations made by Mr. Crowder. But of course, being Mr. Leake and his colleagues who were against the thing to start with, what do? They sat on their hands and said nothing. Although it was becoming obvious that C.O. O'Connor was now the main target of the attack, this was only the first of a flood of bad news O'Connor received following his return to Western Australia on February the 17th. Almost every aspect of the management and policy concerning the pipeline was now dragged out. These included the revelation that before coming to Western Australia, Hodgson already had business dealings with the two contractors, Curtin and Finlayson. The debate ended with the appointment of a select committee. It was ordered to report on February the 17th, ominously again, the day of O'Connor's return by ship from Adelaide, and with a promise by Leake of a royal commission to ensure that the matter was taken to final account. Premier George Leake's remark that the government had to force the completion of a project, quote, which, as he said, for many years past, the majority of the members on this side of the House had opposed tooth and nail, confirmed that the government's interest in the scheme was in the letter and not, as it was with Sir John, the spirit of the Coolgardie water scheme. In other words, O'Connor could go hang himself and do whatever he seemed so far as Leake was concerned. On February the 18th, the day after its release and the return of O'Connor to Western Australia, the West Australian newspaper published the Select Committee's report in full. O'Connor was soon in receipt of both the report and, more or equally importantly, the minutes of evidence. The Select Committee's findings open up an entirely new and unexpected aspect. This was that Thomas Hodgson, as a public servant in charge of the pipeline construction, having already acquired some 40,000 acres of land around pumping station number 3 at Condinan in 1896, had sold part of that land to Finlayson, one of the contractors, for a consideration. The committee also found that Hodgson's behaviour in borrowing, in inverted commas, without interest money from Couston, the major beneficiary of this machine caulking contract, could not be regarded, quote, as satisfactory. The committee's report also revealed that Couston, as contractor, and Hodgson, as a supervising engineer, had previously worked together during the construction of the Devonport, Tasmania Municipal Water Scheme. On the following Tuesday, February the 26th, a Royal Commission with greatly increased powers to subpoena witnesses, swearing on oath and so on, was established with Charles Harper, the other owner of the West Australian, as chairman, quote, to inquire into and report upon the conduct and completion of the Coolgardie water scheme. As this was not enough, and aimed directly at O'Connor as the head of the Department of Works, the government also foreshadowed a second Royal Commission aimed directly at O'Connor's administration of public works under his hand. This lapsed with O'Connor's death, because if it didn't, it looked as though he was hounding a dead man, but he was not to know that. So as far as he was concerned, one select committee and 2 Royal Commissions he was about to face. Faced with the report and the evidence of the Select Committee, and with the prospect of 2 Royal Commissions, one can now well imagine the enormous impact this must have had upon C.W. O'Connor, not least because he must have realised that as Engineer-in-Chief, he would not only be the most important witness, but because of the foreshadowed Royal Commission on the Department of Public Works, everything was aiming at him. The Royal Commission appointed inquired into the scheme, but because it did not make its final report until months after C.W. O'Connor's death, its findings, released in July 22nd, 1902, are not relevant to tonight's proceeding, but one day I'd love to talk about them. Now, apart from the shattering experience of discovering he had been abandoned, we're going to show that note again. Apart from the shattering experience of discovering he had been abandoned to his fate by his political masters, the full force of Parliament's attack on O'Connor, his department, and the scheme, amplified as they were by the Sunday Times calling a spade a bloody shovel, because that's what they were doing all the time. Vosper was an incredible failure. He was really behind the riots in Calgary. Another story you'll find in the book. Vosper was a very strange person. He'd been to jail in Queensland for causing labour strikes. He's a very interesting man. Now, amplified by Sunday Times, must have been devastating to O'Connor. Then, to add insult to injury, he must have suddenly realised, on reading the minutes of evidence, that Hodgson, his trusted second-in-command, was the one whose evidence clearly indicated that he, that's Hodgson, was involved in questionable activities with his former mates, Couston and Finlayson, while in the eastern states. Having read everything put before him, having made copious notes, as is O'Connor, in his defence while at home, knowing he was about to face 2 Royal Commissions as the principal witness, he must have concluded, quite logically, quite rationally, most likely on the Sunday, when he was strangely silent about his family, or to his family, to end it all by taking his own life. There's one interesting question, however. We can only conjecture at what might have happened had his daughter, who usually went with him on that day, was feeling unwell and apologised to him for her absence. Therefore, had the jury taken the advice of the coroner and delivered a verdict that C.W. O'Connor had died, as I said before, by his own hand through a bullet wound from a revolver at Rob's Jetty, through worry and overwork, without any reference to his state of mind, then the collective guilt of those in high office, as was indicated on the day after his death, which you know I said by the editorial in the West, and the media who had insulted and abandoned him would have been revealed for all to see. Instead, the verdict, while in a state of mental derangement as given, absolved them from any responsibility because he, as the victim, was the cause of it. What a mockery of justice for a man who stands only second to Sir John Forrest in our esteem as a founder of modern Western Australia, and whose death to this day continues to haunt us in its mystery and shame. I'm sorry, it's dreadful.